So thank you all for being here. I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of the Jewish Studies program, the Department of Religious Studies, and the Department of Art and Art History. Our guest today is Diane Palley, presenting on the theme of Stand in Shadow, Seeing Ourselves Through Text and Image. Right after this presentation is over, she will be leading a workshop in which you can try your hand at the art of paper cutting. That workshop will be hosted by Ilan Hillel at the Scott Hillel Center. Some of you signed up in advance. There may be room for just a couple more people to join that workshop. And so if you are interested in joining, I encourage you to head over to the Scott Hillel Center after this presentation is over, right after we're done with our time together, and check in there with Nancy Lubroff to see if we can squeeze you in. Diane Palley is a world-renowned artist who has worked in various media throughout her life, including printmaking, illustration, paper cutting, ceramics, and fabrics. She has created hundreds of original paper cut images, illustrated books, posters, and CD covers. She has designed arcs, panels, banners for architectural projects, and she has displayed her work in more than 50 national exhibitions. The many awards that she has received have included the American Institute of Architects' Excellence in Religious Art Award and the Massachusetts Fellowship in Folk Art. She is known to many in North Carolina as the artist responsible for the silk-screened and etched panels at the Goodson Chapel at the Duke Divinity School in Durham, and she recently completed another significant project for another North Carolina institution, this paper cut here commissioned by Edenton Street United Methodist Church in Raleigh. Her presence here at Elon today is made possible by Edenton Street United Methodist Church and its Director of Music and Worship Arts, Elon alumnus and Elon parent, Kevin Holland. So thank you, Kevin. And thank you to the supporters of this event here at Elon, to Religious Studies, to Art and Art History, and to the Laurie and Eric Scott Emerging Scholar in Jewish Studies Fund. We're thrilled to have Diane Palley here today. Please join me in welcoming her to Elon.
It is such a delight to be here. Until 6 months ago, I never heard about Elon University, and now I'm telling everybody I know about it. What a treasure you have here in the middle of North Carolina, and this building is just such a gift. It's so beautiful. So I'd just like to let you know what we're going to be doing this afternoon. I have to stay close to this mic. That's it. If I start to wander, somebody tell me to come back and talk into the mic. I came back to North Carolina. I was here a couple years ago when we installed the panels at Duke University Divinity School, and we just brought this piece back, and I just want to start out with a story. Last summer, I was sitting in my Albuquerque house, and I get a call from somebody from a Methodist church in North Carolina who would like to talk to me about a possible project. And I said, okay. And he said, well, I'll be there in an hour and a half, because he was in Santa Fe. So he and his wonderful wife, Karen, came and visited me. And in this era of social media, I want to make a plug for face-to-face communication. It makes a difference to have met you two. Kevin said that he was working on this musical program, trying to combine light and dark, tragedy and hope, that it's part of life and that we have to have both of them. And he wanted to collaborate with someone from a different media. He's a musician. I'm a visual artist. I'm a paper cutter. So we started talking about doing some kind of artwork about Holocaust for Holocaust Memorial Day. This was about 9 months ago. And over the months, it evolved that it wasn't only Holocaust, it was all genocides, Holocaust standing in for. And we started talking about we have to include slavery because it affects our North American experience so much. So we started developing this project, which has ended up in this piece. At the end of the talk, I'll get back to this piece, and I'll unpack what the meanings are. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about my journey as an artist, as a spiritual Jewish person. Then as a Jewish artist, I want to tell you a little background about Jewish paper cutting, and then we'll get back to this piece. So, before we start real quickly, I just want to introduce a couple terms. One is Midrash, and Midrash is this wonderfully creative, imaginative tradition in Judaism where not only are we not allowed to embellish the text, we are supposed to do it. We are supposed to bring ourselves to it and interpret it in ways that are meaningful to us. And I was taught paper cutting by my mentor who called his work visual Midrash. So that's what I consider that I do. I take text and embellish it, interpret it, explore it visually. The other term is Hidur Mitzvah, which is a principle, it's a concept in Judaism, which comes from, this is from Exodus, this is my God, and I will glorify or exalt him. And the rabbis of the Talmud spent years trying to figure out how human beings could glorify God. And they came up with, we do that by performing every single action we do in our lives in beauty, in grace, with an extra measure of attention. And there is this wonderful tradition in Judaism of setting a beautiful Friday night table, putting the tablecloth and the candles and the flowers and the challah that they're baking over at Hillel. And sometimes in my family we would do all that and have pizza, but that's okay because we had the beauty on the table. So that has also been part of my journey as both an artist and a Jew. The one I didn't put up here is another piece of my journey, which is Tikkun Olam, which is another concept in Judaism, which means to repair the world. That is why we're here. We're here to correct, to repair, to fix what is broken. And in working on this project for 9 months, I've, in researching Holocaust and slavery, I have learned the precise nature of how broken so much of our world is and has been. But if you combine that with Hidur Mitzvah, so you fix the world in beauty, and that's what I've been trying to do. So I'm going to give you a quick tour of how I got to be a Jewish artist. I've been an artist all my life from the time I was 4 years old. I was sent to school to get a philosophy degree, but I kept on coming back to art and tried architecture, tried all kinds of things, and moved to New Mexico in 74 for the second time, and found that my artistic skills were needed by the political movements at the time, ecology, land grants, human rights. So I became a political poster maker. I started doing silkscreen posters. I don't know if anybody here has ever done a silkscreen the old-fashioned way, but you actually take an X-Acto knife and cut the stencil and peel off layers so that the ink can get through the stencil. So I did dozens and dozens of silkscreen posters, so I learned how to use a knife. That was my introduction. So this was done for Native American tribe up in the Jemez for an ecological threat. This was done for a Hispanic Chicano group fighting for land grant rights. And you'll see these hands again. This was in a more violent time in the country and also in my life. So I had these hands down which a river of blood was flowing. If there are any art history majors here, if anybody knows about the Mexican muralists, Siqueiros, I borrowed from his images. Folk art is available for everyone, so we can all borrow. So this was, again, a silkscreen. There isn't much money in doing political posters. So I moved to Boston, and I was, before I get there, So I liked cutting out layers of paper. I liked the feel of the silkscreen layers on paper. So I started doing paper cuts of my own. These are layers and layers and layers of silkscreen paper. I had done political art. I'd done community art for Native Americans and African Americans and Hispanics and every other group, but not for my own community of origin. And I went to a synagogue in Albuquerque, and there was a wonderfully welcoming rabbi there, Paul Citron, who asked me to do the cover of his temple bulletin for Passover. So if anybody knows the song, it's not Who Knows One, sorry. It's Chad Gadya, which is a folk song, and it's about a little goat. In this case, it's looking at a roadrunner. That's how folk art evolves. You add on what you know in your own community. So that was my first piece of Jewish art ever. And then I left New Mexico and went to Boston. I didn't know about Jewish paper cutting. I had known all about, these are Chinese paper cuts. Has anybody ever seen Chinese paper cuts? I'm a paper cutter, and I don't know how they do it. Incredibly intricate. So I always knew there were Chinese paper cuts. I was surrounded in New Mexico by Mexican paper cuts. It's part of the yearly calendar. There's a new set of stringed paper cuts that you put up on Day of the Dead and at Christmas and at Easter. They're everywhere. But again, I never knew that there was Jewish paper cutting. So I moved to Boston, decided I'd give up being a Jewish artist or an artist of any kind. But I walked into a gift shop in Boston on Brookline Avenue. I don't know if anybody here has been to Boston, to a wonderful gift shop called Ketubot. And I saw a Jewish paper cut on the wall. And this was one of the second generation of Jewish paper cutters. And I said, oh, I can do this. So I went home and made my grandmother, who was 90 years old, a paper cut for her birthday. What else do you get a 90-year-old? And strangely, this was the first piece of art I ever sold. I mean, not this one, when I started doing Jewish paper cutting. And it was actually bought by her daughter-in-law. So there was somebody, my own community was supporting me in my art form. So I started learning about Jewish paper cutting. I was very lucky in Boston. Two of the premier paper cutters at the time lived there. His name is Martin Farron, Martin and Joanne Farron. They illustrated a lot of books. And they were very welcoming. They taught me how to do it, what kind of knives, what kind of self-healing cutting boards to use. Very welcoming. So I learned a lot from them. And also Yehudit Shadur, an Israeli paper cutter. And if anybody is interested in paper cutting, she wrote the definitive book on Jewish paper cutting. I think it's called The Art of Jewish Paper Cutting. And you can Google Yehudit Shadur. It's a wonderful book. So I started learning about paper cutting. Paper cutting almost died out during the Holocaust. Other pieces of Judaica survived, gold and silver, because they were worth something. But paper cuts were too fragile. They had no intrinsic worth. Most of the paper cutters in the world didn't survive the Holocaust. Maybe a dozen ended up living in Israel, kept on practicing this art. Another generation picked it up, and another generation. I'm probably third or fourth generation. And now there are more paper cutters. So this paper, just by doing paper cutting, it's an act of survival, of recognition of surviving the Holocaust. By the way, paper cutting is done everywhere. Every culture has its own tradition of paper cutting. It's inexpensive. You need a knife and paper. You can get, if you fold the paper in half and cut, you get a very powerful, symmetrical digital image, black and white, high contrast. So it's been done all over. There's a Polish tradition of paper cutting. It's called, Wisanon, I forget how to pronounce it. Is it in there? Yes. There's Sharon Schnitzer, which is German, and there's Lisa Nanki, which is Polish, many layers, many colors, beautiful work. They do paper cutting all over Asia. They do paper cutting in Indonesia. They make those amazing puppets, and all over Mexico. So I started learning about Jewish paper cutting. Before the Holocaust, actually 50 years before that, when there was still an intact Jewish community all over Eastern Europe, paper cutting was completely integrated into the Jewish life of the community. There were paper cuts for holidays. There were paper cuts for specific events. The most common paper cut was an east wall marker, and we're going to actually be making small east wall markers in our paper cutting workshop. Sometimes the paper cuts were colored on top. Sometimes they were left white. As I said, very few paper cuts survived the Second World War. There may be 150 from before the Holocaust. Most of those were taken from Europe by YIVO, a folk art organization, which went over to Eastern Europe in the 1920s and documented the folk art of the Jewish communities there, which is why we even have any of the paper cuts we have. It was done in North Africa, all over the Sephardic, the Spanish Jewish world. Real quickly, when Jews lived in Muslim countries, they followed some of the rules about not portraying people or animals or even plants. So it's mostly geometry. As you'll see from the slides, the Jews adapted to whatever community they were in. And the second commandment about not making graven images has been interpreted broadly over the last 2,500 years. This is a paper cut used to welcome Adar, to welcome Purim. And again, there's always been a porousness between the communities. If you notice, there are two fish there because Purim usually happens in March, which is when Pisces happens. It's a sign of Pisces. So Jews borrowed, always lived in their own communities. There was always an enrichment of the many communities. There was a special plaque that was made, that was put in the sukkah in the celebration of the holiday of Sukkot, where we live in temporary huts for 7 days. So you welcome in different guests, traditional people in the Jewish history. And as you can tell, there are paintings on this paper cut. So much for Jews not creating images of human beings. This was from Italy, where painting representing human figures was very well developed. So they also have painting on this paper cut. A lot of them were left completely white, which is what I usually do. This was a memorial plaque. In synagogues today, they often have metal memorial plaques, but this was done with paper. All of the functions in the Jewish calendar and the Jewish life cycle were done in paper cutting. This is a plaque commemorating a Jewish learning society. This is an amulet for protection. There are a lot of, some of the remaining paper cuts were actual amulets, and in the old shtetls, the old villages of Eastern Europe, sometimes they would have one of these, like an amulet, paper cut amulet for the protection of children, and it was carried from house to house, whoever had an infant who wasn't yet 30 days old. So it was a communal event. Everybody didn't have their own paper cut, but it was carried from house to house. That's echoing the saying, it takes a village. This is an Omer counter. This is a calendar used to count the days between Pesach, Passover, and Shavuot. There are 49 days. It's like Pentecost. And there's a blessing you say on every day. So it's an actual functional calendar. This is another plaque that has all the different blessings. There's a blessing for every single event, time of the day. Everything you eat, it has a separate blessing. It's a huge, it's an honor to say a specific blessing, not a general blessing. So this is talking about all the different blessings. This is an interesting paper cut. This is called a roisela, which means it's rose in Yiddish. And all of the other paper cuts you just saw were all done by men and boys. Girls and women often were not educated. Sometimes they were illiterate. They certainly didn't know enough Hebrew and text to do the kind of midrash, visual midrash, that Jewish paper cuts do. They say that the boys who used to go to these schools called yeshivas, these little schools in Eastern Europe, they would sit and wait for their teachers, and they would have wooden tables, and everybody had a pocket knife, and they would sit and do their paper cutting then. But girls didn't often go to school. But girls and women did this paper cut for Shavuot, for the holiday of Shavuot. And it's a rose, and they were decorating the houses. They would put them on the windows. So I learned a lot about traditional paper cutting. I learned about paper cutters who were working today. So I started doing paper cutting, and I've been doing it since 1988. So this was an illustrated Hebrew alphabet. I meant to point out in the other paper cuts there was often a double-headed eagle. I don't know if anybody noticed it on the top of some of them. People would put a symbol of the country they lived in to identify where it was made. And that was the symbol of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So in that vein, I wanted to identify myself as a Jewish American artist, paper cutter. So I don't know if it's clear enough, but there is a symbol of America in here. I'll give you a hint. It's for Daled. It's the Liberty Bell, yeah. Also, I spent a considerable amount of time in Philly, and it's very close to my heart. This was inspired by that Omer counter, the calendar, to count the days between Shavuot, Pesach, Passover, and Shavuot. This is actually a functional calendar. I think I have a laser. Oh, yeah. So this is the moon cycle. The Hebrew calendar is lunar. So I marked the holidays around the outside. So, and these are the months and the days, and the centerpiece of Jewish time is the Sabbath, when we stop creating, we stop destroying, we stop doing. And as our electronic life gets more and more busier and busier, I appreciate the Sabbath more and more. This is a paper cut. This is a verse from the Talmud. It says, whoever saves one life saves the whole world. Real quickly, Jewish paper cuts are often identified, if by nothing else, by the presence of 4 animals. You see an eagle, a deer, a leopard, and a lion, because of another verse from the Talmud, the commentary on the Hebrew Bible, which says that you must be light as an eagle, swift as a deer, brave as a lion, and strong as a leopard, to carry out God's commandments. So those 4 animals indicate that this is part of the Jewish tradition. And the interesting thing about this paper cut in relationship to this piece that I did is that the actual verse is, Whoever saves one life saves the whole world. Whoever kills one life kills the whole world. And when I went to do the paper cut, I wanted to stay in the light. I wanted to be positive. I wanted to only put out the positive message. And it's when Kevin challenged me to do a piece which had both verses, whoever saves one life and whoever takes one life, to look at both life and death, good and evil, good and what we can do in both areas. So this piece is a completion of the first half of the quote that I did 10 years ago. I appreciated the opportunity and the challenge and the commission to do a piece which was not only about the beautiful things in life, but allowed us to look at all parts of life. So in that vein, this is a tree of life. Tree of life is a very strong, is very, very prominent in the Jewish tradition. And again, this was a relatively easy paper cut to do, if complicated, because it was about growth and survival and fertility and diversity, and just, I put in every animal I could think of with verses. This is the verse that says, I've set before you life and death, therefore choose life. So I was moving towards this project. But again, the tree of life is it's all alive, it's all growing. You also see the 7 species of plants that are mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. So in a lot of traditional Jewish paper cuts and in all of mine, I put dates, figs, olives, pomegranates, figs, what? Wheat and barley, and thank you, I'll get back to the wheat and barley. Okay. I've illustrated 5 or 6 books. So this was for a machzor, a high holiday prayer book for a congregation in Canada. And this is for the Judaic Studies people. This is for the Vinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King prayer that's said during the high holidays. And it says, act for us with righteousness and kindness. And these words are going to show up again in this paper cut. And this was from that same book, that same project, and this was the illustration of the book of Jonah, thank you, which is read on the Jewish high holidays. And this was for a book about the Zohar. This was called the Ethical Tales from the Zohar by Aryeh Weinman, and it took the ethical stories, the moral teachings from the Zohar, which is the classic book on Jewish mysticism. And this is kind of it's part of the whole tradition of Jewish mysticism called Kabbalah. My Kabbalah teacher called this the Tinker Toys of the universe. This is the structure of the universe, as above, so below. Everything in the world that we know can be placed in this system of sphirot or emanations. Basically, they're trying to explain what happens between us and God. So this is part of a book, and this is one of these emanations. This is splendor. And in the Jewish world, everything is connected, much like paper cutting. So this grouping of characteristics stands for both Aaron, and it stands for a part of the soul, and a time of the day, and a year, and a description of a part of the body. It's everything has a relationship, has a connection. This intense development of meaning. And this was done for Jewish Women's Archives in Boston. It's a wonderful online repository of celebrating the accomplishments of Jewish women who have often been left out of our history. So in this one, I put in, there's the whole, there's the phases of the moon, along with the phases, the development of a pomegranate. And a quote from Proverbs, "Women's wisdom has built this house," with a very free translation. So I've done mostly Jewish paper cuts, but I was contacted by the Free Software Foundation. In my day job, I was a hardware, software techie person until a month ago when I retired. So I was contacted by the Free Software Foundation. They're a wonderful group that do a lot of good work in the world. They give an award every year to the one group that does the best technological work to improve the world. So they commission paper cuts. There are all these techies, and they wanted something handmade, low-tech. So actually, this one was for the group that allowed the revolution in Egypt to happen because they bounced the dissidents' emails all over the world. So paper cutting has taken me in strange places. Anybody knows any techies here? That's the GNU for the Free Software Foundation. I've translated some of the paper cuts. Oh, I think I'm going to keep talking quicker. To other media, this is a silk screen that's done on fabric and then quilted together. I started out my life as a quilter before I did paper cutting, two of the more crazy-making media. And this is beading on top that I was taught by a Native American friend in New Mexico. Again, there's that porousness of cultures that allows us to live with each other and learn from each other. Also, New Mexican colors, turquoise. This was a piece of Pray for the Peace of Jerusalem. I started silk screening on glass. I wanted some kind of a more permanent way to do the paper cutting. With another rather liberal translation. For the sake of all life, let us now speak words of peace. So I've done a lot of buildings, a lot of installations. This is silk screened on glass, many layers of silk screening in Concord, Mass. This is in Newton. These are silk screened images on glass so that you can see through them. This is another synagogue in Newton. This is sandblasted glass, so that it changes according to the sunlight. Another silk screen. This is a ner tamid. It's an eternal light. In all synagogues, you have a light that is always burning. And this is silk screened with the words on that found their way to this paper cut. Let justice roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. And this is a piece getting in the process of being silk screened. This piece is in Columbia, South Carolina, at another United Methodist Church. So for the last 10 years, I've done a lot of Ketubot. A ketubah is a Jewish marriage contract. The text started out 2,000 years ago. It's actually quite progressive. It's a prenup, a legal prenuptial contract that protects the woman's rights in the marriage. It's a rare and amazingly early protection for women. I do mostly interfaith ketubahs, where I work with the couple to honor both of their traditions. So here you have the Chinese double happiness carved into the tree and a kite. And here you have the moon turning into the crowning head of a baby because the bride is a midwife who's now having triplets. they wanted a windmill because they're deeply committed to ecology. And it's also, they realize that the ecological struggle is a lot like Don Quixote, tilting at windmills. I've done a whole lot of bicycles because a lot of the young people I do ketubas for, they're deeply involved with ecology. There's all kinds. I mean, those are our mountains in New Mexico. Those are the sandias. I've done 3 Celtic Jewish ketubas, which is good because Celtic knots work very, very well with paper cutting. This was for a rabbi. This was for one of the brides was Jewish and the other bride was Irish. So we have another Celtic Jewish ketubah. And this was another interfaith ketubah. And the couples bring to me stories of their lives, and especially the ones that are trying to bring two traditions. The outliers are trying to create a life in between. They bring to me their whole life and want me to craft a story about it. So that's the bridge in Florence where they were married. That's the barn where the bride's mother grew up. I do lots of fluffy cats and pets. The groom went to Harvard. We weave meaning into it. By the way, there's a rose and wheat in here, which I put in all my paper cuts. If you look at this one, you'll find roses and wheat together. I was raised in a tradition of Tikkun Olam, of Fix the World. I was taught union songs as lullabies. So there was, for anybody who's a history major here, there was a strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts in 1912, which was led by the women factory workers, garment workers. And their slogan was, give us bread, but give us roses too, which is another understanding of Hidur Mitzvah, of making your life, of doing every action in your life with beauty. And the women in that factory knew that they needed more than just enough to sustain, just pure sustenance. They also wanted human dignity and beauty. So I put roses and wheat together everywhere. That's a repeat. Again, people weave their stories. These are the colors of the University of Pennsylvania. The groom was going to propose in the Eiffel Tower, but he couldn't wait, so he proposed in the Sacré-Cœur. So I have clouds on top of the church where the cross is. And I put the, I don't know if anybody's ever been to the Philadelphia Folk Festival, but there's the banjo with the face. Another paper cut with not a single tree, but a double tree. This is, I think, one of the few ketubas I've done where both people have been Jewish. So I put the 2 trees coming out of the same roots. And when people come from different traditions, I have the trees with roots and opposite edges coming together to form a new union. So this is my Taoist Jewish Buddhist ketubah, where you can see the merging of symbols. This is a Khamsa, which is a Christian, Muslim, and Jewish symbol of blessing and peace. And woven into it is a Buddhist symbol of it's the eternal knot, indicating the connectedness of all things. And then the text is done as a yin-yang. Okay, so, and you're going to see some of these images again. This was the groom was a filmmaker who works on prison reform, deeply, deeply committed to the injustices in our prison system. So he wanted chains that were being broken. So I learned how to do chains that are broken apart, which came in handy on this one. He also if this is a Kiddush cup, it's a glass that has broken shards on it. And in Jewish weddings, you always break a glass. And he wanted the broken glass on his ketubah because he wanted to show that in this world where we can have wonderful marriages and weddings and families, there's also people who are broken apart. So that's, I took some of these images and put it into this piece. Let's see. Right, this is a ketubah for a couple where the groom did the walk in northern Spain, the Compostela. There's a pilgrimage, and wrote his fiancée love letters, which I copied the words of. People, they lived in San Francisco with the Golden Gate Bridge. People weave their lives together. This was another ketubah with the hands again are holding water, which is flowing down with the words on this paper cut, let justice roll down like water. Okay, so now a couple minutes about how I got to North Carolina. I illustrated a book called Reading Ruth. It's a wonderful book of women's commentary on the Book of Ruth. I was giving a lecture about it at Boston University. And Ellen Davis, this wonderful professor from Duke University, was at that presentation and saw some of my work and went back and got the commission at the Divinity School, which Kevin then saw. So, which is how I ended up in this absolutely beautiful building. And in that book, the Book of Ruth, I did a paper cut, which was similar to that Roisela, that simple paper cut that I showed you earlier. This was my tribute to all the women and girls in Jewish history and in all of our history who weren't able to express themselves to do what they wanted to do. So this is a woman's blessing. This is also from the Book of Ruth. These are the panels in front of Goodson Chapel at Duke. They were silk screened on glass, many layers in back, and then sandblasted in the front. This is Psalm 42, and this is Psalm 43. Okay, now we're going to get to this piece. I'd always wanted to do this. People say, well, how do you think of this stuff? How do you come up with your ideas? Well, this is how I came up with my ideas. I get a very brief idea that's on the left, and it ended up being pretty close to what I ended up with. And then I shared with Kevin the middle sketch with all of the meaning of what it all meant, and then it changed some, and that's the final. So this is what you have here. I really struggled with this piece. It was the hardest piece I've ever done. In the Jewish tradition, we celebrate life, and this piece was a challenge to celebrate life and look at tragedy, look at suffering, look at human cruelty. So I was struggling with how to do that, how to allow people to bear to even think about tragedy, and not put it off on other people. It isn't what the Germans did to the Jews. It's what we can all do to each other unless we're aware and careful. So my rabbi in Albuquerque said, well, put it in front of a mirror. So that's where this whole idea came from. And it's positioned so that when you stand in front of it, your eye is right where the bird is, and your heart is right where the hands are. That's a selfie I took through the mirror. I mean, I didn't know until I got the paper cut done and got the mirrors delivered whether you would be able to see. The interesting thing is, as you look at it, you see the paper cut, and then your eye goes back to see the mirror, the image of ourselves. You know, babies are born with hardwired to seek out human faces, to look at eyes, to look for connection. So that's what we do. We look at ourselves, and then focal length of our eye changes, and you see the image, and then back to ourselves. So you can't get away from yourself with this piece. I'm going to leave a little bit of time for questions, but real quickly. So this piece, the central image is the burning bush for a couple reasons. One is that the burning bush was God's, in the story, that's how God got Moses' attention. And the message God wanted to give him was to go back into Egypt and free his actual brothers and sisters, his enslaved brothers and sisters. And the interesting thing about that is that Moses could have lived a life of ease. He could have passed. He could have not taken on the struggles. But that was the message of the burning bush. And the other message is that this place is a holy place, that the ground you stand on is holy ground. And I thought that was a necessary part of dealing with tragedy, that there's both pieces in our lives. And around the outside is, am I my brother's keeper? Am I my sister's keeper? And in Hebrew, it's, where is Abel, your brother? And he answers, I don't know. I didn't know. Am I my brother's keeper? So the point is that I don't know isn't an acceptable answer. So then we have a tree of, we have a tree of life, which is not quite as vibrant as the trees of life that I've done in my other paper cutting. And at the bottom, there's that fire again, fire of suffering, also fire of holiness. And it took me months and months to come up with symbols and images of slavery, in specific the American slavery experience, and the Holocaust standing in for all genocides. Real quick story, I asked my husband to do some research on the web. I was busy doing paper cutting, so he was researching on genocide and slavery. And I asked him to come up with some numbers and some figures that I could drop into my piece, into my explanation. So after 2 days of investigating slavery, he said, I need a break. I can't deal with it. 80 million slaves in the world today, and not metaphorical, real slaves. And he was so broken up. And then as I was finishing the piece and I needed to write my artist statement, I needed some numbers about genocide. And he would say things like, well, when do you want me to start? I mean, do you want me to include Armenia before this 20th century? I mean, where do I start? I said, oh, just the 20th century. So, you know, I finally said, just give me a number. And he looked at me, and he's this 6'2" tough veteran martial artist, and crying, and said, I can't. I mean, the numbers range from 60 million to 260 million. There are so many genocides that have gone on, some that we remembered, you know, and some that we weren't even aware of. And they're going on today, he said. He said, I can't give you a number. So all I suggest is, all you have to do is type into Google, how many victims of genocide in 20th century, and let it break your heart like it broke ours. It's simply unthinkable. And how to then represent it. I couldn't use the typical images. I couldn't do cattle cars. I couldn't do crematoria. I couldn't do ovens. It was just re-traumatizing. For slavery, I wanted to put a noose showing the lynchings, and I couldn't put a noose on here. So everybody I talked to about this project for the last 9 months, there are so many people in this project. Everybody has a piece of it. I was talking to an artist friend about, how do I represent slavery? And he said, I see the boat. I see a slave ship. So this is the actual boat. It's the Duke of Argyle. It was the slave ship that John Newton was the captain of when he had his conversion and wrote Amazing Grace and went back to England and became an abolitionist instead of a slave trader. So that's my symbol of the fact that we can all do something. Wherever we've been and wherever we come from, right now, we can have that change. I did chains and handcuffs. For the Holocaust, that was my mother's suggestion, burning books. There was a German poet, Heinrich Heine, a Jewish German poet who very early, 1821, wrote, "Where they first burn books, they will burn people." This was 150 years before the Holocaust. So this is standing in for destruction of cultures and destruction of people. I live in New Mexico. The destruction and suffering of Native Americans is so real in our world. We live surrounded by it. So I have two feathers. One is broken, and the other one is still vibrant. This is indigenous peoples all over the world. The genocides to them, and they are still here. We are still here. Finally, we have a Jewish star made out of barbed wire, and that reminds us of the patches, the badges that Jews were forced to wear during the Holocaust. And not only Jews, there's a triangle on the other side made of barbed wire. The Nazis had this incredibly elaborate system where they had a different color triangle patch that was sewn onto everyone's sleeve. So it was blue for political prisoners, and it was brown for gypsies, for Rom. It was pink for homosexuals. It was they had, and then if you were two of them, they had special ways of trying to designate that you were both of these aberrations, both of these othernesses for them. So this triangle represents that the first step of slavery and genocide is making someone into an other. We're running out of time, so I'm going to quickly go ahead. So in amidst this tragedy, the tree, this is also these angular dead branches are also the broken glass of Kristallnacht in 1938 when Jewish businesses and buildings were smashed. But the tree survives, and so do we. And, by the way, these are the notes of Amazing Grace in the waves. If you read music, you can sing them. But the tree survives and blossoms and grows, and there are words from the Hebrew Bible from our shared tradition, which is, God is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Which is from Psalms. And also, surely God is in this place and I did not know. And then surrounding this, we go out into images of oppression, but also hope, and also instruction on how to get there. So the side panels are waves, crashing waves. They're also the parted waves of the Red Sea during the Exodus. So it's that there is freedom, there is hope, there is passage. And the quote is, let justice roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Then there are two more panels with that complete the message of this piece. We started with, take off your shoes, this is holy ground, am I my brother's keeper, am I my sister's keeper? In the middle, you see what happens when we don't listen to that. And on the top, it's love your neighbor as yourself. Barbed wire is turning into grapes and figs, and there's a quote from Micah that says, everyone shall live beneath their vine and fig tree and not be afraid. So when you see vines and when you see grapes and figs together, that signifies a time of peace. So we've gone from brother and sister, okay, taking care of our brother and sister because they are most like us, to, we're moving a little further out, which is a neighbor, not a relative, neighbor, someone you live close to. So we are told to love our neighbor as ourself. And then finally on the bottom, we go out further. And here you have the barbed wire turning into roses and wheat that we saw earlier. And this verse is, you know the heart of a stranger. The most repeated expression in the Hebrew Bible is, do not oppress a stranger, you know the heart of a stranger, or you were once a stranger in the land of Egypt. So we've gone from brother and sister to neighbor to stranger. And then, oops, wait. Okay. And then again on the outside, we just have more of the burning bush on the corners. And we have about 3 minutes for questions. By the way, just real quick, I did a lot of research for this. So there's an excellent book called Absence and Presence, Critical Essays in the Artistic Memory of the Holocaust. There's another book called Evoking Genocide, which is about which works of art inspired, it says. Scholars and activists describe the works that shaped their lives. Talks about how people got inspired by art. These were part of my journey in trying to create, which is what I was tasked to do in the beginning, to try to create a piece of art which is compelling enough, beautiful enough, so that we can stand in front of it and remember the suffering and cruelty and not repeat it, but become more compassionate and more loving. So, thank you. Thank you. We could have a couple questions, and then you can also come back to Hillel, and you can either do paper cutting or just schmooze. Yeah. Okay. The hardest part is people always ask me, well, what happens if you make a mistake? And I tell them, I stop before I make a mistake. They say, well, how do you know? So the point is that I have to be completely present, totally focused, totally committed, not to what happens over here or the shopping list, but it's just that moment, that intensity of that focus. But it also helps me focus. It can be used as a form of meditation. So, just that focus. Yeah. Any other questions? So you can come experiment for yourself. When I give paper cutting workshops, half of the people say, oh, that's kind of interesting. About a fourth of the people run out tearing their hair out saying, why would anybody ever do this? And every now and then, and there's usually one person left in the room saying, oh my God, I've waited all my life to do this. So I've trained another generation of paper cutters. A couple of years ago, I got an email from somebody, and she was spending a year in Africa in a hut, and she had seen my paper cuts back in Boston. And when she got back from her year in the hut in Africa, she wanted to come to my house for 2 weeks to learn paper cutting. So you never know. And it's keeping it alive. It's passing it on. This, like so much else, like indigenous languages that are disappearing every single day. So much of the diversity and beauty in our world, both human and natural, is disappearing. So this is one way of saying we're surviving. So come try it for yourself. Thank you. Thank you.